Now welcome to another Let's Talk Some Star Wars, where this time we'll be taking a look at and discussing the results of the poll that asked what you thought of the 8th and final episode of Season 1 of Ahsoka. I'll then also be reading and responding to some of the comments left on the poll. And so let's get right to it, where we'll see that 14% of voters thought it was awesome, 31% went with the episode was pretty good, 29% then thought it was about mid or average, which left 14% to say it wasn't very good, and a final 12% who thought it was terrible. And as we've been doing all season long, let's compare these results to the results from the previous episode, and do note that the poll for the entire season on the whole, what you thought of this overall, is already up, so if you'd like to vote and comment on that, I'll link to it, and all my polls should be in the description below. But anyway, as we compare these previous two episodes, we'll see that the trend does continue. The trend of people's ratings kind of steadily going down as the season goes on, or since the 5th episode has continued, which the 5th episode was pretty much by far our highest rated episode. That was, of course, the Anakin episode, and that seemed to be kind of where the season peaked for many. Furthermore, not only did more people kind of fall from the top options to the middle options, but even more, quite a few more percentage points trickled down into those bottom two options. A lot of people, roughly a quarter of all the voters here, thought this wasn't a very good or just a plain terrible episode. And that's obviously not the way you want to wrap up a season. You don't want 1 out of 4 people disappointed with your finale. Though all that said, a few percentage points shy of half do still rate this one as pretty good or better. That's certainly not awful, though it should be pointed out that it was just last week's episode that was just shy of 60 percentage points, so this one fell quite a bit. Again, this is not a great drop-off for a finale that, in theory, should almost be the highest rated episode of the season if you've really been doing your job with the previous episodes. Either way, it seems half the audience, or half of my audience who watched it and participated in this poll, they were generally pleased or happy with the finale, though as does tend to be the case quite often, that wasn't necessarily reflected so well in the comments. There were a lot of people who had a lot of negative things to say, not a ton of praise down there for the finale, with pretty much every single one of the highest rated comments being critical of some aspect of the show. And so for those who will inevitably ask, why am I mainly focusing on the negative here in this video, especially when, again, half the people seem to like it? Well, it's because I try to make these Let's Talk Some Star Wars videos a reflection of what the community is saying or wants to talk about. And sometimes it'll be far more bad than good, if you will, or it could be vice versa. Go back to watch the Let's Talk from episode 5 and you won't see a whole lot of negative brought up in that video. Basically, I simply go with the flow in regards to what people seem to want to talk about with the episode. But anyway, before rambling on about why or how I pick comments, let's get to the actual comments, but not before, once again, just saying thank you to everyone who votes, comments, and watches these or any of my videos across both the channels. Also, a huge thank you to everyone who supports this channel on Patreon and makes my Discord server the best place on the internet to talk some Star Wars. And now, on to the comments for real, where this time the top-rated comment came to us from Drevin, who said, I've come to the conclusion that George Lucas was smart to use a droid army in the prequels against Jedi. Everyone is too scared to show a lightsaber's true power versus humanoids, and it really hurts the battle scenes in this show and others. And though I do very much agree, I don't think you want your good guys going around or to be shown killing living, breathing beings in mass by dismembering them all the time. I do think there is a reason why they don't necessarily show the true extent of lightsabers sometimes. Though certainly the good guys do kill a lot of people, a lot of living, breathing people in the original trilogy, even if you don't necessarily realize it. There were a lot of people on that Death Star. They just don't do it quite so directly or where you see them dying or, again, being cut up. And so I do think with George Lucas obviously wanting to show a lot more lightsaber action in the prequels, with the Jedi being at the height of their power and all that, and showing them involved in a war, that one of the main reasons, maybe the main reason he created battle droids, or that's just what he went with for the Separatist army, is no one would think twice about watching the Jedi rip through them like fodder. It would never cross anyone's mind that they were doing anything wrong or immoral, not like you almost inevitably would if you watched them doing the same thing to humans or humanoid species all the time. If you saw them literally being cut in half or pieces being chopped off all willy-nilly. But no one that I've ever heard anyway had any kind of issue with the battle droids being slaughtered, even though, yes, Star Wars oftentimes does present droids to be almost sentient. However, with those battle droids, at least in episode 1, he took it a step further, and thanks to the droid control ship, he implied they were nothing more than pawns or drones, in no way acting with their own sort of free will. It also could be why he made the Geonosians, who get hacked up a little bit in episode 2, why he made them bugs. For one, people generally do not like bugs, and for two, they felt more like drones, like part of a collective or a hive mind, rather than free, independent thinkers. And so now moving on to this comment that is very much related to this previous one here, or set up by it, we have one from Commander who said, "This episode really struggled with a few issues that people have been complaining about for years. The biggest one, of course, being dismemberment. The zombies should never have been a problem because the lightsabers should have cut off their limbs, immobilizing some or most of them, but instead the lightsabers only cause a scratch." And though, like I just said, you don't exactly want your heroes running around dismembering everybody and everything they come across, it is kind of silly that as far as we saw, and not counting the Death Trooper at the end who Ezra decapitated, not a single Night Trooper limb was removed by a lightsaber in all their fighting against them. And as I kind of joked about in my review, clearly zombie movies are not a thing in the Star Wars galaxy because they didn't immediately know the rules for surviving a zombie movie or a zombie apocalypse that all of us here on Earth do. That to stop zombies, you go for the head, or at the very least you take off a leg or an arm or something to make them less mobile or less dangerous. And so yeah, it is kind of silly to see three very intelligent people with lightsabers with arguably the best melee weapon you could ever have against the zombies. It's kind of silly to see them not know how to handle this situation and instead be forced to essentially run away, when in all reality our heroes would have and should have realized pretty quickly that if they just kind of, again, hack off some limbs, they should be okay. In that it could have been done with the same level of ease we saw droids being hacked apart during the prequels or Clone Wars, that a lightsaber is going to go through that plastoid armor and whatever bones or flesh is underneath pretty easily. Okay, and next up here we have a comment from MC's Creations who said, "I wanted more from Shin and Baylan. Other than that, nothing blew my mind. It was exactly what I expected. Perhaps with the exception of Ahsoka's ship being damaged, I really didn't expect that." And yeah, in my book, everything with Baylan and Shin was simply on another level, and I mean that both in terms of how interesting it was and how well acted or how great of a performance they gave. It really makes me wonder if part of the reason I enjoyed those first 2 seasons of The Mandalorian so much is it just dealt entirely with brand new characters and things. If I'm just kind of getting sick and tired of seeing the same characters over and over at this point. Even when it comes to characters that I am a huge fan of, that I love, and even when they handle them really well, which I more or less thought was the case with Anakin in this. I really was thrilled to see him. I thought it made sense to bring him in, and they resolved part of Ahsoka's story with him, and that was all really good, I thought. But more and more I'm coming to the conclusion that Star Wars needs to move on entirely at this point. I've talked a lot lately about just going back to the Old Republic, carving out your own little space in that time period, one not yet explored at all, creating some new great characters, making a show similar to something like Game of Thrones, maybe with a little less nudity and sex in it, but with all the intrigue and the moving parts, with a lot of well-developed new characters, and then from time to time including some big-scale Jedi versus Sith battles and just going all in on something like that, all in on the spectacle from time to time, though you have a good foundation of substance underneath it all. I mean, honestly, after Thrawn was not very Thrawn-like, the thing I am by far looking forward to the most right now, assuming we do get a Season 2, which I think is likely, it's Baylan and Shin, especially Baylan, given how Shin decided to just kind of go or take over a nomad tribe or something. But I'd have to imagine she will encounter Baylan again at some point and factor into whatever the hell he is doing out there. But speaking of Thrawn, let's get to this comment from Pedro, who said, "The greatest military mind in the Empire couldn't figure out that if he hovered his Star Destroyer slightly higher or just not above the tower, then the heroes would have no way to get to him. Genius." And yeah, there just seemed like there were many things Thrawn could have done, or many ways he could have secured the win easier and more definitively. And I know he still won. I know he got away, and our heroes, or at least Sabine and Ahsoka, got left behind and stranded. That is a win. But instead of something like any sort of brilliant strategy being implemented here, he basically just ran the clock out. He kneeled on the ball when he had it at the end of the game. And I don't know that, especially for the more casual fan who is new to the character of Thrawn, who hasn't read books, seen him in Rebels or anything, and is just taking the show's word for him being this military genius. I don't know that it sells him as something to truly be feared, like, again, the show kind of keeps telling you he should be. I'd say Moff Gideon from the first 2 seasons of The Mandalorian, with how ruthless he could be, he seemed a lot more like a credible or dangerous threat than Thrawn has so far, until all that clone stuff in Season 3. Sadly, I think all of that was just to clear the way for Thrawn, that they wanted him removed so Thrawn could slide right into the role of big bad antagonist. And so far, Thrawn, I'm sorry to say, and I love the character, but he's only been the bad part of that. Alright, let's now move on to this comment from ZS Mott, who said, I honestly really enjoyed it and was very surprised when I watched your recap video. I thought it put all the characters in a good spot for season 2 and or movie. If this were the only season and that was it, I'd be unhappy, but I highly doubt that's the case. It wasn't perfect, but I had a lot of fun watching it. Good series. And I am glad you enjoyed it. I truly am. I have absolutely no ill will towards someone who loves something I maybe didn't love entirely, which again isn't to say I hated the show. I thought it was okay, but overall the finale was certainly disappointing. There were a lot of things that I guess you could say didn't allow me to enjoy it because they just weren't well done. And for better or worse, right or wrong, my enjoyment oftentimes, if not usually, is predicated off things making sense in the story. And I mean that in context. Obviously, some things in Star Wars already do not make sense, but that has long since been established as to how they work in universe. I guess it just goes back to what I was saying a little bit ago about wanting new characters. I just feel like sometimes we go through the motions with these sort of legacy characters that at no point did I feel tension because we know this is just a setup for something else later on down the road. I think that's one of the big problems with franchises nowadays. You always know this is to set up the next thing, not necessarily always about this thing. That, as you even kind of say in your comments about wanting a season 2, that season 1 doesn't stand on its own, that sometimes it's just about getting the characters into position for something else. And I think storytelling needs to be, or should be, more about the journey than the destination. That's what a story is. The story is the journey, not eventually where you get to. And this show didn't feel like it was about the journey. It again felt like moving pieces on a board for where they need to be for what comes next. Whereas I'd rather be vested more so in the moment, and I just wasn't with the series. And look, though, yeah, all storytelling is contrived. All of it is someone making arbitrary decisions for fictional characters, trying to tell something that is cohesive and make it enjoyable to watch, or read, depending on what form it might take. For me, what makes a good story, what makes good characters, is being able to mask that or make me forget about the, shall we say, meta aspect. I don't want to think about the guy behind the curtain who is pulling the strings, right? I want to again be in the moment with these characters and find what they're doing believable to the point where I get so vested in the outcome for them that I forget it is fictional in a manner of speaking. I don't want to put everything in the context of what this means for the next season or a movie 4 years down the road. Sometimes, again, I just want to be in the moment with the characters. And I'm not sure if I am making any sense whatsoever here, so maybe I'll try to talk more about this or elaborate on this in a future video. But for now, let's get to a few final comments before wrapping it up, starting with this one from Nikado, who said, I wanted to love this show like I did the first 2 seasons of The Mandalorian, but it was okay in my opinion. For me, Balin's story is more interesting finding out than Thrawn's war against the Republic is. Then there's this comment from The Fits the Wits, who said, a fundamental problem is the lack of tension. At no point did I feel that any of the protagonists were in any real danger. I couldn't help but laugh when they were just galloping through a turbo laser barrage on their mounts. We also have this one from Tommy Faust, who said, my biggest gripe was Sabine unlocking the Force and doing it so quickly. It's been established that the Force is in every living being, but only a select few are sensitive to it and can act as a conduit for it. Having Sabine being able to go from zero to hero begs the question of why Jedi aren't training everyone, or why didn't the Empire train stormtroopers in the way of the Force? In the words of Syndrome, when everyone's special, no one is. Moving on, we have a comment from Tony Hicks, who said, it was really good, much better than the other shows released by Disney, besides Andor of course, but still has much more room for improvement. And finally, we have this one from Apache Man, who said, I still can't get past Ahsoka not using the help of Ezra and Sabine when fighting with Morgan Elsbeth. A 3 versus 1 would have guaranteed a quick defeat and more time for all of them to get to the ship. That also solves the somehow Sabine learned Force push issue because Ahsoka doing that with Ezra, maybe even Sabine too, would have been a lot more believable. No Baylan and Shin other than the cameos at the end. I am excited to see what they do with the father and son statues. That was a letdown too, especially for Ray Stevenson's final time on screen. Overall, the finale was poorly executed in my opinion, from the fight sequences all the way through to the characters' decision making. The episode left us with more questions than answers, and the answers don't appear to be coming for at least 2 years. Well, that's all I got for you this time. Now it's your turn to take to the comments below and tell me what you think of my responses to any of these questions, or any of the questions themselves, or what you thought of the final episode. Or, of course, you can always go and vote and comment on the poll that asks you what you thought of the series overall. Whatever you choose to do, leave a comment somewhere and let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.